So with that, I think it is officially time to get started. Welcome to the single question to predict success for DevOps and what it means for change control. This is a Redgate sponsored webcast. And at Redgate, we really care about DevOps. There's a lot of things we do at Redgate, but one of the things that we've done so far this year, we've done 582 product releases so far this year. We do DevOps for our own tools, and our tools enable our customers to be successful at DevOps. 91% of the Fortune 100 use our tools, and that is because we enable people to do database DevOps in ways that make life simpler and free you up to be able to think more about the nature of the changes that you're making. My name is Kendra Little, and I am an evangelist at Redgate Software. And I'm happy today to talk about some insights from a recent Redgate webcast. We were really lucky to have Gene Kim join us for a discussion about the 2018 Accelerate State of DevOps report. If you're not familiar, the Accelerate State of DevOps report is a really interesting report that comes out based on survey results each year, and they survey DevOps practitioners about what they are doing, how often they are able to release, their tempo, the success of the release, the lead time of release, how long it takes to recover from failures. And they gather lots of information and put this together to report on the state of DevOps. They even have, if you're interested in learning about the methodology behind this, they have a book that's also called Accelerate that goes in deeper across multiple years of the survey, and also discusses their methodology and how they get insights from these survey results. Now, Gene Kim is one of the folks from the IT Revolution group, and when he did the webcast with us, he spoke with Redgate's Steve Jones to talk about takeaways from the 2018 report. And I really enjoyed listening to the webcast. I encourage you to watch the whole thing, but it's one of those conversations where sometimes you're like, oh, wow, that's some of these insights. I just really wanted to talk about them. I was like, I want to join the conversation in my own way and do a follow-up webcast and talk about some of the things from their conversation that just really struck me as being very insightful and important. So we're just scratching the surface of that. They talked about lots of stuff during that event, but I really want to talk about 3 key insights during this half an hour that really resonated with me. These insights from Gene Kim, I'm going to play clips for each of them, and then we're going to dig into them and discuss them. We'll be talking about how database operations is kind of a conundrum. It is both a high spend area, but then historically it's also been impoverished in a certain way, which is very counterintuitive, but I think very, very true. We'll also talk about the single question to predict success in DevOps, and we'll talk about the implications that this has for change control. So we're going to dig into this first area. How can databases be so expensive yet be so impoverished? This concept is a little bit hard to figure out, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Let's listen to a 44-second clip of Gene Kim explaining how this is to Steve Jones during the webcast.
Who's in our way? Who's constipating the flow of work, impeding all our goals, dreams, and aspirations? And it's the DBAs. And I think it's a very uncomfortable place to be, because it's that we're in the flow of every major stream of work, right? And we are, when we make changes, it's a global change that could potentially take out every service all at the same time. And so I think this shows the criticality of databases, and I think until very recently it's been one of the more impoverished areas, right? It spends the most amount of money, but if you take a look at the technical practice and the tools, they were very I think primitive compared to what you would find in development and later operations. So I'm so glad to see this incredibly vibrant ecosystem of tools being created to support the DBAs.
When I when I heard that clip on the webcast, I had just never put these things together before. I had never thought about the fact that we spend so much money on databases. I mean, the cost of licensing is so high for relational databases, and staffing for DBAs, for database developers, building up and getting people with these skills. This is a high cost area. And I absolutely knew that. And I also knew that, yeah, a lot of us don't use automated releases. We use these very manual processes that are really old, but I never had put together that our processes and our tools are impoverished even while we are spending so much money. It's kind of like spending a lot of money on food, but getting very little nutrition in certain aspects of the food that we're eating. And it isn't even necessary. I mean, in terms of fixing this and reducing manual work, it isn't even necessarily going to push that cost up too much. It can increase our productivity to the point where it really pays off and we're getting more for our money. But there's reasons, like Jean said in that clip, there's reasons that we haven't done that. Now, we do really need to do it. This is from Redgate's State of Database DevOps report. Redgate ourselves do a survey looking at database DevOps. And this isn't just of our own customers. We opened this survey to people using databases everywhere. And what we found in 2018 is that only 52% of database development is using version control. And this is one of the very basic elements of standardization. Like only 52% is even at the very entry level of storing code in source control. And we really need to raise that up and fix this impoverishment. This is so low, like Jean said, the database is in a critical flow of work. And we have a big fear of mistakes. I think being part of that critical path, the fear of mistakes is huge, but there's other reasons why we have not enriched our tools in this area. We have also really, I mean, in my experience, oversimplified some critical security principles. There's this notion that developers should never change production. Developers shouldn't have permission to change production. And sometimes we have auditing about, yeah, developers shouldn't be able to directly make change to production. But that has been really oversimplified to mean that the only permissions to change production should be like personal accounts by DBAs. If what we want to do is make sure that the only changes that go into production are truly ready for production and are safe, the safest, best way to deploy to production isn't the manual change done by a personal account. There are ways that we can do this with a system account, right? We have system service accounts for a lot of things. We're used to doing it for monitoring. We're used to doing it for all sorts of things. Why shouldn't we have changes deployed to production using tested, repeatable, safe processes using a system account, as long as we can make sure that they only actually flow to production when they should be flowing to production, and it's not just, you know, a random change someone is making. We have lots of ways to make that happen. We have lots of ways to build feedback and review and permission into the process to make sure that, hey, it's not just like I'm doing a random change in the middle of the night without telling anyone. Another reason that this hasn't happened is the separation of teams and a lack of collaboration between teams. We need to have the folks who specialize in the database and the folks who specialize in application code work and function together as part of a shared team to solve and automate these things together, instead of it being, hey, you guys have your automation tools and we have our automation tools. We need to find ways to bridge that with automation and say, these are our automation tools and we all understand them and can use them in the best way possible. This is from a recent survey, statistic from the Developer Coefficient 2018. This is a poll done by Stripe, the payment company Stripe. They hired Harris Poll to do a poll. And they surveyed 1,000 C-level executives. And they asked them, how much of a priority is it for upper management to increase the productivity of developers? And 96% of respondents of these C-level executives said that it is a high or medium priority to increase the productivity of developers. A big way to do this is to be able to have all of our changes following DevOps processes and taking the manual work out of all of them, including the database layer as well. So to fix that impoverishment in key areas. In terms of telling how productive are we, in terms of measuring how productive are we, another insight from the webcast that really I thought was interesting was this concept of a single question that can predict the success of your team. And let's listen to a clip of Gene Kim explaining what that question is and when they came across it.
We found decisively for the first time, we actually included databases in the State of DevOps report. And what we found was that, yes, integrating technical practice, cultural norms, treating DBAs as we would every other part of the value stream does increase performance. And so every breakthrough that we've seen in terms of how we do modern software delivery in the application, on servers, on platforms, networking, right? Those are as applicable to the database as well. So everything that we've learned about configuration management, on automation, on monitoring, observability, and tight team dynamics, shifting left, all those things apply. And thank goodness, because on the next slide, I think the best way to articulate how important this is there's one fact that came out of the State of DevOps report, I think 3 years ago, and it was this, is that you can predict almost every metric we've talked about and every technical practice and cultural norm by asking one very simple question, which is on the slide. On a scale of 1 to 7, to what degree do we fear doing deployments? 1 is we have no fear at all, we just did one. 7 is we have existential fear of doing deployments. And that's why in our ideal, if we could wave a magic wand, we would do a deployment never again. We're done with doing deployments. And I think because of the nature of database changes, because of its global nature, because it's irreversible, they're one-way transformations on data that often you can't transform them back. Making changes to databases is extremely scary. I still resist doing schema changes just because I fear them so much.
That explains so much to me. And having worked in environments where we deploy changes rapidly, it's really interesting because I have been in a place where we are deploying many, many changes to production. And even though we just deployed a change to production, we are still really afraid of it. Because if we are in a place where we are releasing frequently to production, but when we release, we have to spend lots of time cleaning up afterwards and fixing things, we are going to fear doing database deployment. So 2 things I think really, many things contribute to fear of doing database deployments, but it is heavily impacted by the tempo at which we deploy changes. If we do something less frequently, we forget how to do it, especially if it involves, manual steps. And if our release quality isn't good, if we break things a lot when it goes in, then we fear doing deployments as well. There is a tempo. We don't necessarily want to go from deploying every 6 months to deploying every 6 minutes. That's going to be terrifying too. But continuously improving our tempo, continuously improving our release quality will change what we answer on this scale. And it absolutely makes sense to me that this question would really give a big insight into how good we are at releasing quality software that makes a difference for our customers. So in terms of measuring where we are in a DevOps process, baselining this information, asking all of our team members, the database folks, the software folks, asking this question, even the business folks, the marketing folks, right? Because they're going to get deployment fear as well if every time we release, or if a lot of the times we release, we're causing chaos and we're damaging the brand, they're going to have deployment fear as well. So baselining this, continuously improving and continuing to measure this is a very simple and I think powerful way of looking at how we are doing in terms of our success at DevOps. What do we improve along the way? At Redgate, we see that there are really 4 key areas to work in when enabling and improving database DevOps. We start with standardization, and at the very beginning, a lot of that is getting out of that minority of people, hopefully a shrinking minority of people who don't have their code in source control, and standardizing our coding practices, getting database code into source control. There's also automation, how we remove manual tasks and how we learn to deploy changes in smaller frequent chunks to the customer so that it's easier to identify, hey, something's different today. Okay, well, what have we released recently, rather than what were the 10,000 different things in this giant lump of changes that we deployed into production. Looking at how we protect data is also a critical part of DevOps, making sure that we're building resilient database systems that we can restore from backup, and that also, if our environment goes down, we can bring it up in some way according to our SLAs, and keeping the experience present for our customers. And finally, monitoring, which is not just about monitoring performance. That's very important. Monitoring performance and availability is still very important, but also in terms of DevOps is very focused on having visibility into the customer experience. And monitoring can provide that visibility of what is the customer doing and what are they experiencing in our app. It can help bring that together. We released a new feature. Is the customer using it? Are they getting stuck at one point when they try to use it? Are they frustrated with it, or are they thrilled with it? More and more, that visibility is incredibly important, both for the database layer and for the application layers. As Jean mentioned, in the 2018 State of DevOps report, for the first time, they included the database in the report, and they did find that having your database code stored in source control and using DevOps processes to manage the pipeline of changes the same way that you do with app code doing DevOps is a predictor of success, of being a high performer at database DevOps. So that is really good that they considered that aspect to it, because a lot of folks left the database out of DevOps, and I think it drags down that process, because if we're only doing DevOps processes with part of our code, and then we've got this other place where we're afraid to deploy, we aren't going to see all of the benefits of DevOps processes. But what does this mean for change control? You know, this all sounds really good, being able to deploy things rapidly and respond to them rapidly and keeping production healthy. But how do we do this? Because this is particularly scary when it comes to database code. Like we already heard in one of the earlier clips, this is a critical path. If we mess this up, it can mess everything up. So let's think about change control. And there's another clip that digs into this in terms of, if we are doing DevOps for the database, what are the implications for change control? So let's listen into another clip from Jean Kim.
You know, we've always known that testing is important, right? You can't get high deployments, through relying on change approvals, right? Instead, that reliance is going to come through automated testing. And so again, that's a decisive factor in performance. And there's again, validation that continuous testing practices are required and contribute to SDO performance. By the way, I still think, like, one of the most delightful findings to come out of this is, the notion that testing is not the job of the QA department. In fact, one of the contraindicators of performance was, is who's responsible for the acceptance test library and maintaining it. And if they answered the QA department, that was just like like change approvals, external advisory boards, right? Its performance went down. So instead, really, testing has to be owned by development as just another aspect of delivering software. And so the same thing, applies, with database, right? It's like our ability to migrate software into production, includes, how do we do it safely, on the database.
this is one of those things that when we think about it, how are we migrating things to production, and what should we wait on? When I first started back in IT, the way that we did this was that a ticket would come for a change release, and it would progress through different environments with a fair amount of manual work, some of it automated. And then it would get ready to get deployed, and development would help fill out some of the justifications for this. The DBA would take it to the change board, and they would have to defend the change. The board, which largely consisted of the head of IT and leaders of different areas, would ask questions and kind of interrogate it. And then sometimes it would often get thrown back of, oh, we need to know more about this risk and how to counter this risk. And there would be kind of a go, no go. And the no go would usually be like, wait till later. And if there was a no go, there was generally pressure from key stakeholders who were like, no, we promised this to go out. So there's sort of this competing friction between the business representatives who want it deployed, the developers who want it deployed because they've already they're like, we're already working on something else. We don't want that to wait to the point where we don't know what's in there at all. And then the DBA, and the DBA is generally tasked with stability. DBA generally doesn't often, unless it's a feature for them, doesn't want it to go forward at all. There's just all of this friction in there. And I used to be a huge fan of this friction. I thought that this was the way to solve problems, but why do we ask all those questions at the end? Wouldn't it be better off if we asked the tough questions early on in the design of the change? And if we made sure that by the time a change is done, all of the tough questions have just been asked as a matter of course. All of that review has been asked as a matter of course. Wouldn't that make life, instead of going all the way forward, going back, going all the way forward, instead of having what I had as a result of this process of like 3-month lead times, where we're deploying changes, database changes frequently to production, but so many of them just keep getting so backed up, in part because this change control process that when they release, nobody even remembers what's in the code. Wouldn't it be better if we could front load all of this stuff and get it done? When I grew up in the IT world, we absolutely used process as just a ready-all solution. If we made a mistake, just add another layer of process. It's like a Band-Aid that we would just keep piling it on. And the result was we ended up with so many bandages that it's kind of like you lose mobility because you've just got such heavy layer of process. Changing your change control process absolutely isn't something that just you if you're a practitioner, it's not something that just a practitioner can do. But if you are a team lead, if you are a manager, if you are an IT executive, this is absolutely worth thinking about. And when you're thinking about this, don't just think about getting rid of change management. It's not really about getting rid of the ability to manage changes. It's about spreading it throughout your process. Truly making this work requires other things. Setting global outcomes. Don't just say, hey, the DBAs are responsible for the stability of the system and the developers are responsible for throughput of code. If we leave it that way, we don't bring the team together. We need all groups to be responsible for both stability as well as tempo. If I, as a DBA, am judged not just on stability of the system, but on regularly delivering value to our customers, and if the same thing is true for the development team, that pushes us together to build the most effective flow of what are the tests we need to do? What is the feedback that we need as part of this system? How do we identify changes that need to be deployed at special times based on the nature of our change and the nature of our SLAs? It really pushes us to get that process together and to fine tune it so that we can do it well. Another thing that really enables this is that visibility of the customer experience and monitoring. We need to be able to tell when changes don't go well. Well, what about retrospectives? Retrospectives, there's a final insight from the webcast that I want to share here that I think is really, really helpful as well. Let's listen to Jean talk about retrospectives.
The finding here is that having retrospectives, the notion of something, as a part of daily work, we have specific rituals to talk about what went wrong, process improvement. That does lead to better performance. And There's a Western organizational typology model, which we integrated in the survey for many years. The notion of pathological cultures where information is hidden and messengers of bad news are shot. The bureaucratic cultures that, the cultures create a merciful culture, and then there's generative cultures, which are high trust. Messengers of bad news are trained to tell bad news. New information is actively sought. Retrospectives improve organizational culture and create a sense of a climate for learning. So that's super exciting. I love the phrase, the way we, in dynamic learning organizations, the way we win in the marketplace is to outlearn the competition, right? So stuff like this absolutely matters.
I think that's so important. And this is one of the things that we can start doing right away, and that everyone can encourage, from the practitioner level up through the C-level executive, in fact, because we aren't going to change management overnight. We're not going to implement the perfect DevOps processes overnight, but we can start doing retrospectives and continuously improving on them in a way that can help us build our DevOps processes from the ground up. Now, back when I started in a software organization, we didn't have retrospectives. We had postmortems. And postmortems, they didn't drive deployment fear down. They didn't predict our success. They drove deployment fear up, because postmortems didn't emphasize learning. What postmortems emphasized was finding the responsible party to blame, because they only happened when something had gone wrong. How do we have retrospectives in a way that isn't like that? How do we have retrospectives in a way that actually drives deployment fear down and puts us in a growth mindset, improves our culture, and gets us to a place where we can start tackling this hard stuff? Well, one of them is we want to normalize them. We want to have retrospectives when something goes well, when something goes so-so, and when something goes wrong. During them, we want to model a growth mindset. That means not being afraid to say, oh, I just didn't know about this. Not being afraid to admit that you're wrong, and disassociating punishment from those retrospectives. This doesn't mean that nobody ever loses their job from just not being right from it. But this does mean that the retrospectives shouldn't be themselves a source for you've got a bad review. That process of review of performance should happen totally separate from these retrospectives. The retrospectives should very much emphasize learning, and they should just be part of how we do business. It's not just Gene Kim and his fellow researchers that say that this is a critical thing. Google has published research they did on what makes a successful team at Google, and psychological safety, the ability to say, I can speak up when I don't understand something, even though I might otherwise be afraid to look dumb, to be able to say I made a mistake. That ability to not worry about sounding out of a loop is a key indicator of a team's success. And if we can do that, if we can feel safe to take risks when working on development, that is going to result in better outcomes of our changes, because we're going to discover a lot more important things about the change before it ever gets close to the production environment. So revisiting the key insights from Gene Kim, there's three big things that I just got lit up by when I listened to this talk. That single question to measure DevOps success, to what degree do we fear doing deployments, is just really powerful and a useful thing to baseline. Baselining this and then continuing our process can help us get this high spend area of the database that can help us add the right tooling and keep it from being this impoverished area where the people who support it do a lot of manual work that takes up their time and keeps them from adding value to designing better changes and figuring out how to do things better, how to get the most out of those expensive licenses. And as we do this, as we follow along this process of continual improvement, we need to change our practices for change control and retrospectives so that we aren't just ending up with this battle and this friction where stability is fighting against throughput. I hope that you have enjoyed this talk. we do have some exciting upcoming events at Redgate. If you head over to redgate.com/webinars, we've got a bunch of upcoming webinars you may find interesting. And then also we are putting on another SQL in the City streamed. On Wednesday, December 12th, we will be doing Your Journey to Compliant Database DevOps. This starts up at 11 a.m. GMT, 6 a.m. Eastern. It will be done via YouTube Live. So even when you join in, you'll be able to automatically rewind to the beginning, or you can watch the recordings later. But I encourage you to, whatever time zone you're in, as soon as you get up and start your day, join on in and ask questions for us, because it's really fun to interact with us live via either Slack channel or the YouTube chat or Twitter during the event. So I'll be presenting 2 sessions during that day. The whole Redgate team will be there, also including Grant and Steve and Kathy. It'll be really fun. The theme this time is Your Journey to Compliant Database DevOps. So go ahead and get registered for that, and I hope to see you in December. Thanks so much for joining me today. And thank you to Jean Kim for doing that webinar. Thanks to Steve Jones for hosting it. My clips didn't include a lot of Steve, but he really kept the conversation going. And it was so valuable for me to get to listen to that webcast. I hope you've enjoyed these highlights from it. I'm Kendra Little from Redgate, and I'll see you again in another webcast soon. Bye, folks.